Hello, very beautiful community. The Putin regime has tried to block Telegram and run into a big backlash. The backlash is predictable, but it's bigger than many people anticipated. I'll tell you a little bit about it and then give you an analysis of what the Putin regime is trying to do and maybe whether it'll succeed or fail. The Z Telegram space has gone bonkers. Now, the Z Telegram space consists of different kinds of actors, but if we are to categorize it crudely, we would say it's a space of pro-war criticism of the regime. It's a space where people demand more war or more effective prosecution of the war and make criticisms of the presidential administration and of the Ministry of Defense in particular. It's that space out of which the Prigozhin mutiny to a good degree emanated a couple of years ago. What we're hearing in that space now is talk of the terminal degradation of the regime, talk of national betrayal, talk of palace coups. Now, there's also been kerfuffle in the Russian Duma with the regime's move being called idiotic, with some fake opposition party leaders expressing concern and formally requesting clarification, explanation, and investigation of this move. Now, it's remarkable that this is all happening over Telegram. We'll say a little bit more about the importance of Telegram in a second for the Z radical space. But one thing I can't analyze effectively for you, that perhaps Anders Pack-Nielsen could, a friend of the channels, is how far the Russian military, for military purposes, relies on Telegram for communication. It's not within my realm of expertise to analyze that. But what is going on and why is the regime making a move that's going to generate a bonk on the nose for it? The central source of potentially threatening opposition to Putin is the hawkish pro-war space. It's not dangerous because the hawkish pro-war position is popular in Russia. It's not. It probably generates 10 to 20% support, as much support as vehement opposition to the Putin regime does. Then there is a depoliticized blob in the middle. But what's powerful about that critique of the regime is that it hits the regime on incompetence. And that, interestingly, is a critique that is convergent with virtually every other good critique of the regime. By good critique, I don't mean valid, normatively appropriate critique. I mean critique that can generate political grip within the borders of the country, that thinks of itself as being borderless, by the way. So here there is no difference between Mr. Navalny's critique of the regime and Mr. Prigozhin's critique of the regime. It's a critique that says you're trying to do stuff and you can't because you're incompetent. What Mr. Prigozhin during his mutiny failed to do, and he wouldn't have guaranteed success if he had done it, but he guaranteed failure by not doing it probably, is he didn't offer a positive story about what he was proposing. He only said to the regime, whatever it is you're trying to do, war, no war, less war, more war, you can't because you're incompetent. And to fix this, give me Shoigu and give me Gerasimov. So, shutting down this Z radical space on Telegram and then seeing it partly migrate to places that are more controlled by the regime would significantly dampen the voice of that demographic and would anticipate future turmoil and future instability. Now, I have argued for a couple of years that Russia is going to experience more totalitarian turns over the years to come, whatever happens. However, for now, we can make the generalization that if Putin were contemplating stopping the war, or stopping the war temporarily, or stopping that particular war and starting some other kind of conflict, he'd be under greater pressure to accelerate totalitarian moves, and the Telegram block could be one example of a move in that direction. It might be that it's something that Putin needs more if he's seriously considering the option of stopping the war, because stopping the war in a way that is completely inadmissible for the Z radical group is going to create a problem for him. It's not necessarily going to be an existential problem, but it is going to be a problem. So one consideration here is that taking a move against Telegram would significantly dampen a potential source of domestic opposition and destabilization for the regime when the waters get patchier later, relatively soon indeed, not now, but in the near future. That's one important thought here, which is inflected by the question of whether Putin is open to stopping the war. My analysis here is that Putin is indeed open to stopping the war. The commentators who say that he is not at all open to stopping the war are mistaken. But he's only open to stopping the war if he's convinced that either Russia can't go on, he's certainly not convinced of that now and won't be in the near future. By near future, let's say months. Either that, or that it can be demonstrated to him that he can be persuaded that rightly or wrongly, the peace deal will put Ukraine in such a precarious and toxic position that something like the collapse of its political system might plausibly follow, and thereby Putin will be able to take advantage. In other words, he wants a peace deal that is more toxic for Ukraine than the continuation of the war. It's not that Putin is completely close to stopping the war, it's that he's completely close to stopping the war on terms that are sustainable for Ukraine. Now, a diplomatically brilliant and highly responsible US administration thrown into the current circumstances, right, that can't be held responsible for things that happened over the previous years. If you threw an administration like that into office, which is the opposite of the vandalism and idiocy of the Trump administration, what that administration would try to do is get a sustainable deal for Ukraine while trying to persuade the Kremlin that it's a lot less sustainable for Ukraine than it actually is. And it's possible to do that in part because Putin is so delusional about catastrophe, about domestic political catastrophe in the Ukrainian space, because he thinks everything that he doesn't like in Ukraine is not really organic. And so there is genuinely room to persuade Putin that a certain kind of fairly sustainable deal for Ukraine is actually not sustainable. But that's not a serious conversation. We're not anywhere near that reality. So that's where Putin is. As currently, it is impossible for Ukraine to agree without essentially signing up to their own self-immolation to Putin's requests. They remain too maximalist relative to what Ukraine could reasonably agree to now. There's no prospect of the war stopping. But that's not because Putin is completely close to stopping the war. There are some arguments which rightly use the notion that Putin depends on the war for regime security to make the case that it is simply inadmissible for Putin to stop it. And the answer is that's not true. It's admissible for him if he thinks that there's a way of stopping the war that'll be even worse for Ukraine than carrying on the war. So there is this interaction between the what is now sort of imitation of a peace process. There's no really substantive peace process going on. It's a sort of a dance in part for Trump's benefit. But there's a connection between Putin's fear of the Z radical group and his conception of whether to carry on the war or not. That's one central thread here. Now, another central thread is Putin's general phobia and Putin's general concerns about revolution. Now, Putin is conscious of what's happened in Venezuela. He is conscious of what we've been witnessing in Iran. And he's thinking back to his historical traumas. The worst trauma for him is Gaddafi, but he would also think of Saddam Hussein. So, how do I bring it about that this doesn't happen at home, or that if and when it happens, I am better positioned to survive it? Right? That's another direction, it seems to me, another thread that plays a causal role in the Telegram move. And it's typical of that kind of authoritarian regime that if you look at the move, you see more vertical top-down political intent there than clarity about how to practically achieve what they're trying to do. I'm going to stop for now and leave these two threads as the main bits of the analysis I proposed. Let's love and talk very soon.